What if, instead of learning one word at a time, you could learn several words at a time with much less effort? What if you could guess the meanings of words you have never seen before? This really is possible. Message, messenger, missile, mission, permission, emission, dismiss. All of these words share a secret that not many students know about. Thank you so much for listening to Master English with Tim. My name is Tim, and I have been teaching English around the world since 2005. I teach English grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation in depth and detail, and without ever hurrying, every Monday. So, what is the secret that I promised to tell you just a minute ago? Well, the secret is that all of the words that I read to you contain a Latin root, miss or mess. Words which contain the root miss or mess usually have a meaning which is connected with the idea of sending something or sending someone. The devil is in the details, though, and in Master English with Tim, I help you fight that devil and win. I do a lot of the hard work for you. So before we start, let me tell you 4 important facts about the root miss that will make your life and learning easier. First, the root miss can have a couple of different forms. The most common form is miss, but we also have mess with an E. Second, the root miss or mess with the meaning of send came originally from the Latin verb mittere, which means send. This means that we also have a third form of miss. This form is mit, and you usually find it in English verbs. Third, the forms with miss or mess are more common and appear in more words, so we will focus on them first. Fourth and last, we have a few exceptions I will tell you a bit more about at the end. So, we will deal with these words in groups. The first group will be ones that have just miss or mess. The second will be ones with a mix of mit and miss. And the last group will be exceptions. So like I said, let's start with miss and mess. So the most common word we have that contains the root miss is message. M-E-S-S-A-G-E, message. And of course, a message is something that you send to another person. People send messages on WhatsApp. They send messages on Telegram. You can also use message as a verb. That means that you send someone a message. For example, this morning I went on a small road trip, and the night before I messaged my friend about what time we would start and about what time we would come back. Now, another word with the root miss is messenger. That's an example of the mess, M-E-S-S form of this root. So a messenger is a person who brings or carries messages to other people. With modern technology, of course, we don't use people as messengers much anymore. We use telephone calls and apps to send our messages. And in fact, one very popular app that we use to send messages is actually called Messenger. That is the name of Facebook's app for messaging people by phone. But in the past, it was common to send a messenger, a person, to deliver important news or important documents to other cities. Also, you probably didn't know that the Inca Empire in South America used messengers who ran on foot 50 or more kilometers on smooth stone roads. After each runner had run their 50 or 60 kilometers, often in the mountains, they would come to a small house built by the government, find the next messenger inside the house, and hand him the message. In this way, a handful of messengers could send a message across the entire country in just days. We have another word that means the same thing as message and that you could find on tests like GMAT, LSAT, or SAT. This synonym of message is missive. That's M-I-S-S-I-V-E. A missive is just a formal or serious message. This is a word that you can find really only in literature or on those advanced tests. So let's move on. Another word with the root miss is missile. M-I-S-S-I-L-E. A missile is the same thing as a rocket. A missile is a weapon that flies a long distance before it hits an enemy. A missile usually looks like a long tube or cylinder with very small wings on it and with fire coming out of the back of it. I think you can see the connection between missiles and sending. Another word that is connected with sending that has this root of miss in it is mission, M-I-S-S-I-O-N. This word has 3 meanings connected with sending. The first meaning is not the most common one, but it is the meaning that kind of explains the other 2. So this first meaning is connected with religion. A mission is a group of religious people who are sent to a different part of the world in order to make the local people accept and join their religion. So hundreds of years ago, when Spain was a big, powerful empire, you could find Catholic missions all over what is now the southwest of the United States and also all over Latin America. These Spanish missions tried to make Native Americans become Christians. By the way, a person who travels as part of a group that tries to convince people to join a religion, that person is a missionary. Missions and missionaries, though, are not always Christian. You can also find, for example, Muslim missions and Muslim missionaries. A kind of similar meaning of mission to this religious one that I just talked about is connected with international diplomacy. In this context, a mission is the diplomats that a government sends to a foreign country to live in that country for a long time. In other words, a mission is all of the people who work in a country's embassy. For example, imagine for a second the Spanish embassy in the Philippines. Imagine now all of the Spanish people who work in Spain's embassy in the Philippines. We can say that those people are Spain's mission to the Philippines. The most common meaning of mission is a plan to accomplish something very large, important, or difficult. For example, trying to make a bunch of people you've never met before become Christian or Muslim or whatever religion is probably going to be pretty difficult. Or traveling to another country to live there for a long time and serve your own country is an important mission. But it could also be your mission to greatly improve your English or to pass IELTS. Or maybe it's your mission to run a marathon. These missions are not connected with sending anyone, but I think you can see how we went from a religious meaning to a diplomatic one, and then finally to a more everyday one of this one word, mission. Now, sometimes you send a person, but you send them away, and you don't care where they go. For example, if you work in an office, and the quality of your work is always terrible, then your boss probably will dismiss you from your job. That's dismiss, D-I-S-M-I-S-S. If your boss dismisses you, it means that he or she fires you. Dismissing someone doesn't always mean firing them and telling them not to come back. For example, when kids are at school, they wait until 3 p.m. or whatever time the school day ends. And when the school day ends, the students are dismissed. They are sent home, but then they come back the next day or the next week. A final meaning of dismiss is to indicate to a person who has given you important information that you think the information is not important. So if someone tells you that, for example, they smell smoke and that you need to leave the building, then you definitely should not dismiss this piece of information. You also should not dismiss advice that a doctor gives you telling you that you need to exercise more. For this last meaning of dismiss, we have an adjective. That adjective is dismissive. That's D-I-S-M-I-S-S-I-V-E. If a person is dismissive, that means that the person usually ignores what other people tell them. Right now, there are many people who are dismissive of what everyone who disagrees with them says. Everyone agrees that this is a problem, this problem of dismissing what people who disagree say, but no one seems to be doing much about it. People are much too dismissive of people who disagree. By the way, the noun of dismiss is dismissal in all 3 of the meanings we talked about. That's D-I-S-M-I-S-S-A-L. So, dismissal from a job, dismissal from school at 3 p.m., dismissal of important information. Okay, now let's move on to a second group of words containing the root miss. Remember that I put these words in a different separate group for you because they use a different form of the root miss. Words in this group use mit, usually in a verb, that's MIT, usually in a verb, and usually the remaining words, the ones that are not verbs, use the more familiar and common form miss. The most common verb with mit is probably the verb permit, P-E-R-M-I-T. If you permit someone to do something, you allow them to do it. You let them do it. In the past, restaurants permitted people to smoke there, but nowadays, restaurants, bars, and cafes do not permit people to smoke. We also have two different nouns from permit. One of those nouns is permit. Notice that the stress in this noun is on the first part of the word, permit. So the verb is permit, stress on the second part, and the noun has stress on the first part, permit. So a permit is an official document that allows you to do something. For example, if you want to go hunting without breaking the law, you will need to get a hunting permit. The same is true of fishing. In a lot of places, you can't just go to a lake, pond, or river and start fishing. Before you do that, you need to get a fishing permit. If you are learning to drive but don't have a license yet, you will need a learner's permit. A learner's permit is not the same as a driver's license. Instead, a learner's permit is a document that lets you drive before you get a license while you are still learning. By the way, if you want to learn more words that change from verbs into nouns just by changing where the stress is in a word, then listen to episode 129 from a few weeks ago. Okay, let's move on. Another noun that we get, the second noun that we get from permit is permission, P-E-R-M-I-S-S-I-O-N. If you have someone's permission to do something, that person allows you to do it. They say you can do it. For example, teenagers need to ask for their parents' permission to go out at night with friends. Now, since we are talking about parents, we can also talk about permissive parents. P-E-R-M-I-S-S-I-V-E, permissive. If parents are permissive, that means that they allow or permit their kids to do almost everything. Kids who have permissive parents don't learn that life is full of limits about what you should do and should not do. And so when these kids with permissive parents become adults, they meet limits for the first time and don't know how to deal with them. We also have another verb with the mit version of the root miss. This verb is emit. That's E-M-I-T, emit. In Latin, that prefix E meant out. When a car or building or factory emits pollution, it puts out pollution, especially into the air. Of course, the less pollution that we emit, the better. The noun of emit is emissions, which is usually plural. So that's E-M-I-S-S-I-O-N-S, emissions. In the context of global warming, you hear a lot about emissions of gases that make the planet warmer, especially carbon dioxide and methane. Every year, the world still creates around 37 billion tons of planet-warming emissions or gases. You can also hear emit and emission with a slightly different meaning in the context of physics. When a radio station or a star or object emits light or radioactive energy, it creates light or radioactive energy and sends it out. So a radio station emits signals that your radio converts into music or news. Stars that are countless hundreds of billions of kilometers from our planet emit light and radiation that reaches us after traveling for countless years through space. The lamp in your room also emits light, and radioactive metals like plutonium and uranium emit dangerous radiation. I have another really cool word now with the mit root. This word is a verb and it has a very specific meaning from economics. The verb is remit, R-E-M-I-T. So sometimes you have people who are from poorer countries but live and work in richer countries. These people earn money in a rich country and then send some of their money home to help their family. In this case, the person remits money to their family. And the money that these people send home is called remittances. That's R-E-M-I-T-T-A-N-C-E-S. Remittances. Remittances. For example, I read on the World Bank website that in 2005, 20 years ago now, 22% of Armenia's economy was remittances. So over 1/5 of the country's cash flow came from people sending money home or remitting money while working in countries like France, Russia, or the US. In more recent years, remittances have been a smaller percentage of Armenia's economy. Now we have one final verb using the mit version of this week's root. That adverb is intermittently. That's I-N-T-E-R-M-I-T-T-E-N-T-L-Y. That's a really big word. Intermittently. If you do something intermittently, that just means that you do it for a certain period of time, then stop, then start again, and stop again, and so on. I, for example, have studied Polish intermittently. I learned it in 2010, then stopped for several years and started again and stopped again and so on. And the most recent time I studied it seriously was in 2022. So now might be the time for me to start studying Polish again. That would be a fun and interesting mission. Now, before I dismiss all of you, my dear students, I want to add a quick but important detail that I mentioned at the beginning of the episode that is about Latin roots and the words that contain them. If you take a specific Latin root like miss or mit, then most, but not all of the words that contain the root will have an easily identifiable connection with the root's meaning. Latin was spoken a long time ago, and so there has been a lot of time for the meanings of words to change from what they meant 1,500 years ago. Also, languages generally are not always rational or logical, and so words like omit, omission, commit, and commission do not have meanings that are clearly connected with the meaning of send. These words, however, again, are exceptions. Okay, that is all for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and see you all next week.